spirit to help him to be able to come back and be able to gather with us again. All these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Okay, today we are down in John, the 5th chapter. Now, last week we talked about this. I'm skipping through in here some things that he did up here. But if you notice, I've got colored over there to the left, really the country of Galilee where Jesus had gone through, and we just got through studying about that, how he had gone through and some of the things that he did there. And here then again, this last week we talked about that Jesus builds his gospel around these 6 feast days. But back here, the year that we have in yellow is the one that we're dealing with right now. Now, as we started out in the Gospel of John, we're down now to chapter 5. Now, in this period of time, Jesus has spent 8 months down in Judea, which would be in the Jerusalem area. And then he has spent 4 months up in Galilee, which is up around the Sea of Galilee. So he has now spent a year in preaching the gospel, and last week in these charts here that I just got through knocking off, why he did several things while he was up there. He performed many miracles. And it says that there were masses of people who began to follow him because they saw all the miracles that he had performed. While he was up there, he chose his 12 apostles to come and follow him in there. And so now then, when you get down to chapter 5, here is where Jesus now is going to return back down to Jerusalem. Don't know whether I told you this or not, but you see, I've got that red line going over on the other side of the sea, of the Jordan River, and we talked about that the Samaritans wouldn't let the Jews just pass through without giving them some trouble, so generally they go around. I read this past week or so where going around on the other side of the Jordan and then up added 4 days to their trip. It was about a 3-day trip if they were able to go straight down, but when they had to go around on the other side of the Jordan River and then up that great steep incline that I've shown you before, it added about 4 days to that. Now, he gets up to the pool of Bethsaida, and that's where we dealt with it this last week. That as you go over there today, this is a modern picture, you look down and the pool is way down there. But now, we made the point of these 2 words, Bethsaida, which means the house of mercy. That's where we are right now. This pool is called a house of mercy. Now, there's another town up north of the Sea of Galilee that is Bethsaida. And that means the house of fishing. So we don't want to get the 2 confused. Jesus is now back down in Jerusalem, and he has come over to this particular pool. Now you have to understand that this pool was a nice pool back in that day. These are the remains that they have dug up and the way it would look today. Now if you look at those steps over there where I had that arrow going, there you can see that would be the steps that this poor man had to negotiate to come down, and every time he'd start to come down, people would step in his way and he couldn't get down. So down there, there's steps somewhere, either at the top of the steps or the bottom of the steps, and somewhere he was laying, and that's where Jesus met him, and that's where Jesus healed him then. Now this healing of this man is a big event. And it's a big event in this way. And that is, from this point on in the Gospel of John, there's going to be a line that runs through the conspiracy of trying to kill Jesus. The Jews down in Jerusalem have now understood after his first year. See, he's preached for 1 year. So after this first year, they now realize this man is a person to be reckoned with. He's to be reckoned with because he has such great followers. He has followers down in Judea. These people had even gone up into Galilee to follow him around up there. He has many followers up in Galilee. And so these guys now down here in Jerusalem. They would be members of the Sanhedrin. Their whole purpose in life is politics, trying to save their own jobs, and they recognize that they're having to deal with a man now to where the people are turning from them and going to him. And so they don't like this. You can just imagine what would happen today if all of a sudden President Obama realized that in America, people in mass was turning and going to some other man who is coming along in the Republican Party. And so if all of a sudden he begins to realize, I'm losing people by the mass, he would get excited, and there's something that he would have to do. Now, they do this all the time in Washington, D.C., and that's what they were doing back there. So these Jews now are really concerned because the masses of people are starting to turn and go with Jesus. Now, in there, we see that as we continue on in chapter 5, you can kind of break the chapter up, and we'll hit it here very fast. You can kind of break it up, and from this time on, you can break things down into 4s. Now, there are 4 sections are that Jesus will show his divine powers by healing this man. Now, when he shows his divine powers, that's really going to get these Jews down there stirred up. Then there's going to be a great controversy with the Jews over the Sabbath. And this results in Jesus declaring himself to be equal with God. So now stop to think as we continue our study in the Gospel of John. Jesus now has performed a miracle that nobody can deny. The man has been handicapped and crippled for 38 years. Everybody around there would know him. And now then, all of a sudden, he's healed. And this guy, by the name of Jesus, whom these people down in Judea do not like, the Sanhedrin, the rulers of the country, they don't like, they come to him and they're trying to destroy him. So they're going to find something wrong with Jesus. Now, the thing they found wrong was he violated the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day said you're not to work, and Jesus healed a man. So, you see, Jesus is in violation of God's law. So here's a man who had healed him. He's in violation of God's law, but Jesus is going to turn this right around and says, no, not so. And that gives me an opportunity to tell you something else. I'm not only not in violation of God's law, I am God. I am deity himself. I am the Son of God. I am the one who made the law. And so now they have a real predicament that they're going to have to deal with. So now Jesus goes ahead and declares himself to be divine in several ways. And then Jesus gives witnesses. At the end of this, he says, now, if you won't believe me because of what you see me do, here are the witnesses that we have that I am divine. Now then he shows his relationship to the Father. He's going to take this occasion to do that. He's going to tell them, he said, I am the Son of God. They recognize and say, if you're the Son of God, that means you're saying you are God. Just like if you're the son of a horse, you're a horse. If you're a son of a snake, you're a snake. If you're a son of a human, you're a human. If you're a son of God, you're God. You're divine. So now, Jesus is going to show, yeah, I am, and I and my Father are united in action. I never do anything without him. He doesn't do it without me. We are united in action. Then we're united in love. We have the same purpose for me being here. and we're united in giving life. The Father can give life, and I can give life. And the life that he's going to start talking about is spiritual life. As the Father can save people, I can save people. And then he's going to end up with physical life. As the Father can raise the dead, I can raise the dead. So he's going to be preaching these things, showing how closely he's united with the Father. Then not only that, but the Father and I are united in judgment. As the Father can judge human beings, I can judge human beings. And I will be the judge of all human beings. Do you begin to see the impact this would have upon those Jews, those Sanhedrin hypocrites, those people that Jesus will later call hypocrites and say you do this and you do that, but you don't obey God? Can you begin to see the impact it's having on them, to where Jesus and these people are in conflict? Now, Jesus then shows his relationship with mankind. He's going to show he has the right to receive divine honors of man. In fact, he's going to tell them, not only am I the Son of God, which makes me deity, but I deserve from you the same honors that you give to the Father. Wow. You can't imagine the impact that would have when a man makes that statement. Then he shows he has the authority to execute judgment of life and death over men. He has the power over both physical and spiritual life of men. Everything he does is according to God's plan. So he's making himself divine. Now you get down to the last section here in chapter 5, and then Jesus is going to give us testimony. He's going to say, now, here's the testimony I'm going to give you to go ahead and complete what I'm doing. I want you to see that it's not only I who claim to be divine, but I want you to see that I have the testimony of John the Baptist. John declared me to be divine. I have the testimony of the Father. The Father has declared me to be divine. You have the testimony of me, myself, and I have backed it up by the works that I have done, that I am divine. And then you have the testimony of the Scriptures. The Scriptures also testify that I am divine. And so he's going to give them all of this, and you just ask, well, where can they go? What can they do? Well, they reject him. They do not accept him. But here are the reasons why these Jews didn't accept him, and he's going to charge them with this. He said, the reason that you don't accept me as divine is because of your lack of will to accept me. You do not want to accept me as divine. And then your lack of love toward God. You don't have enough love of God to be able to accept what God says and accept me as divine. And then you have so much love for the honors of men. You want men to honor you and think about how great you are. So you can't accept the honor that I deserve. All you think about is the honor that you want. And then he says, it's lack of faith in Moses' writings. If you had any faith in Moses' writings, you would accept me. But you don't have any faith in him. Now, this was a cutting statement, because this is exactly the thing that these Jews would say that they were doing. We keep Moses' law. And he's saying, no, if you kept Moses' law, if you believed what Moses said, you would believe that I am deity. Because when you go back and put all the things together, what Moses said, and how Moses said that God's going to raise up another prophet like unto me, and he said, when he comes, hear ye him, and you take all the things in the law of Moses that point to me, you have to accept me. But you don't believe Moses. So he said, now there is your status. So think what Jesus has done, so we can kind of put ourselves in the right perspective when we now turn to chapter 5 and read this. Think of the situation at hand. He has said all of this, he has done this, and here now you have come to this logger's head of these Sanhedrin Jews and Jesus, and how he now is standing there claiming to be divine, and they are standing over here claiming to be great men that people should follow. You shouldn't follow Jesus, you should follow them. And now Jesus has thrown down the gauntlet and says, no, here's the reason you should follow me. The reason you should follow me is because of all the works that I have done, what John the Baptist has said, what God has said, of all the evidence that you have that I am divine, you should follow me. And the reason you won't follow me is because of your lack of love to God and your lack of respect for Moses and your love for your own elevation and honors. It couldn't be any hotter. Couldn't get any worse. When you stop to think, that's the situation as we now opened up our study here in the Gospel of John. So let's go to John chapter 5. And when we get down here in chapter 5, we've already studied some of this, how he went up and he healed this man. And so let's begin now in verse 10. That's where we left off. Now it was a Sabbath day on that day, so the Jews said unto him that was cured, this man that was healed, it is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for thee to take up thy bed. In other words, the guy told you to take up your bed. You can't pick up that bed. Now, keep in mind, remember this. The bed that he's talking about is not a bed like you and I would be talking about. He's talking about what we would call a pallet or a quilt. It's a quilt that you could lay on just to keep you from laying on the ground. So it's something you could fold up and then pick up. So just think about a quilt on your bed. So he said, it's not lawful for you to pick up that quilt because you'd be working. It's on the Sabbath day. But he answered them and said, he that made me whole, the same said unto me, take up thy bed and walk. Now this is irritating these guys. Here's the authority he gave. He said, well, look, you said that I can't carry the bed, but the man who healed me said for me to pick it up and walk. So who am I to believe? Now, when you see a miracle done, and you suppose there's any doubt in this man's mind who has been crippled here for 38 years, any doubt in his mind but what a miracle has been done? So he said, you see, this man told me to pick it up and walk. They asked him, who is the man that said unto thee, take up thy bed and walk? And he that was healed knew not who he was. He said, I don't know. For Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in the place. As soon as Jesus had healed him, told him, take up your bed and walk, Jesus stepped into the crowd, and the guy said, I don't know who he was. As far as he knew, he was just another Jew when he walked up, but now he's healed him, and the guy said, I don't know. Well, afterwards, Jesus findeth him in the temple and said unto him, behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing befall thee. Jesus comes up with him in the crowd and tells him, now you've been made whole. Don't sin anymore unless worse things happen to you. Wow, that raises a question, doesn't it? And you say, why did Jesus say that? Was it because this man's illness was due to some horrible sin that he had committed some 38 years ago? I have no idea, and neither does anybody else. As we think in modern day language, might be something like 38 years ago, somebody was driving an automobile and they were drunk, and they hit a bridge abutment, and they woke up and they were paraplegic from their waist down. They couldn't walk. Well, why were they in that situation? Because of their sins, because the consequences that they were drunk. And then somebody healed them, and you say, now sin no more, or a worse thing can happen to you. Now that would be a modern day thing. It may have been back there, I don't know. He got drunk and was riding a camel and did some stupid thing and got hurt. I have no idea. But it appears that it had something to do with his sin. And Jesus is telling him, now if you think the consequence of sin is being crippled for 38 years, I want to tell you, don't sin again, because a worse thing can happen to you. Now that'd really make you stop to think. He said in verse 15, the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him whole. And for this cause the Jews persecuted Jesus, because he did those things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father worketh even unto now, and I work. For this cause therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only brake the Sabbath, but also called God his own Father, making him equal with God. So this conversation just keeps getting worse and worse as far as the conflict is concerned. This Jew who's healed, he goes out and he tells these people, I found out who it was that healed me. He's that Jew by the name of Jesus. And so they came and found Jesus and told him, you violated the Sabbath. And then Jesus responds back, and he says in here, it said these things, but Jesus answered them, my Father worketh even unto now, and I work. Now, what he's saying is, look, fellas, my Father is never at ease. My Father is always doing something. Now, when you say God rested, remember all that. God worked 7 days in creating the world, creating the universe, and then he rested on the seventh day as far as creation is concerned. But God doesn't rest on the seventh day, on a Saturday that was here, and not do anything. He has the responsibility of keeping the universe running, keeping mankind going. And Jesus said, when it comes to the Sabbath day, and you try to think about it from a Jew's viewpoint. Now, from a Sabbath day, what does that mean? It's the Sabbath day. That means all of us Jews, every one of us, cannot do any work. That means that we now have to follow all of the laws that the Jewish rabbis have made up. They had hundreds of laws that they made up about thou shalt do no work. They made up laws and said you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And some of the silly laws was, I remember reading, one was that on the Sabbath day, if you're sitting on the couch and you take off your shoes, if your puppy dog comes over and picks up one shoe and carries it across the room, you can't slip your other shoe on and walk across the room, because you can't walk with one shoe on. That would be, it's a little harder to walk with one shoe and the other barefooted. And they said that's work. So you have to take off this other shoe, walk over to get that shoe, put them both on at the same time. Otherwise, you violated Moses' command. So there's one of them. And they just went on and on and on about what you can do and what you can't do. And it just got sillier and sillier and sillier and sillier in there. So it, well, one was, I remember in modern day, see, they still do this stuff. In modern day Judaism, why, their law was, the rabbis made the law 100 years ago, that you can't travel more than a certain distance from home on the Sabbath day without it being work. Now they said you can walk a certain distance. Well, how far can you walk on the Sabbath day? Well, what did Moses say? He didn't say. He just said, thou shalt do no work on the Sabbath day. So now, here it is. I'm a great rabbi. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, how far can people walk without it being work? So somehow or another, I take off walking, and I walk a certain distance and say, okay, I think this is it. So here it is, and it turned out to be about 7/8 of a mile that the Jew said you could walk. And then, okay, you can walk from where? Well, obviously from home. So the Jewish law said you can walk 7/8 of a mile down here, and they called it a Sabbath day's journey, without it be considering working, and you can walk this far away from home. So then the Jews said, okay, we'll do that. So then they said, what is home? Sounds like present-day lawyers, doesn't it? What is home? So then they defined home as where your belongings are. Okay. So if a Jew wanted to walk 5 miles, he got up and put 6 handkerchiefs in his pocket. He walked 7/8 of a mile and took a handkerchief out and dropped it. Now, where is he? That's his possession. That's home. Now he can walk another 7/8 of a mile and then drop another handkerchief. And this way, they would do it. But then they also had to deal with the fact, what about people out on boats? They were out on Roman boats, Gentile boats. They said you can only travel this 7/8 of a mile except by water. Now listen carefully. Except by water. You can travel farther than that by water. So, okay. So that took care of that. So by water, they're on a ship, they travel whatever they want to. Then the airplanes came in. And this has not been very long ago till you have your airlines. You see, the airlines didn't start running until about in the 1960s. So they've only been actually running for about 50 years. Now, all of a sudden, you had these Jewish pilots having to face this. They said, we can't fly this airplane on the Sabbath day because we can only travel less than a mile away from home except by water. What are we going to do? So they started working on it. And here's a solution they came up with. And this is still what they do today. A pilot would take a little bottle and fill it full of water, a couple ounces of water. Take it in the cockpit, put it in a pocket, and then fly his airplane wherever he wanted to fly. Because he was flying by water, beside water. That's how the Jews dealt with these things. And they still do deal with these things. Just absolutely fascinating. One of the most fascinating sermons I've ever heard was when I went to hear a Jewish rabbi speak over in Everett several years ago. And he told about Jewish life. And My, oh my, the way it still is today, the way that they do it. Well, these Jews, this was the law that they had, and this is what they were after. And so they came up to Jesus and was telling him, you've broken the Sabbath day. Now, when Jesus said this, when Jesus said, my Father worketh and I work until today, see, they understood, rightly so. Jesus was saying, God never stops working. And I, as his son, never stops working either. So I, as a divine being, am one who healed this man. And I did it because I'm divine. I didn't do it because I'm a human being. I did it because I am divine. And boy, this is what caused them to fly into a frenzy. They understood that Jesus was making himself equal with God. And so the big controversy then started. And it says in verse verse 16. And and for this cause the Jews persecuted Jesus because he did these things on the Sabbath. So now they're starting to persecute him. And from here on, these next 2 years, there's going to be this great persecution between these rabbis, these Jewish Sanhedrin, and Jesus. But Jesus answered them, my Father worketh even unto now, and I work. And for this cause, therefore, the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also called God his own Father, making him equal with God. So the war is set. The battle has begun. And that's where we'll pick up our story next week. But from here on, Jesus and the Jews down in Judea are going to be on this head-on conflict because Jesus has made himself divine.